You're listening to Real Life, No Filter, where raw emotions and real moments take center stage. No masks, no filters. Just honest stories about life, love, and everything in between. Get comfortable. We're about to begin. The July evening of Monday descended upon Olga Miller with a sudden, chilling discovery. She felt as though the world had stopped and then collapsed. It happened the moment she, muttering softly, was sorting through the bag of her husband, who had returned the day before from a sanatorium where his mother had been staying. 30 years old, and he's still like a little child. I have to put everything away myself. Why do I always have to do everything? Natalie must have slipped in her dirty clothes so she could travel light. Thoughts swarmed in her head, adding irritation to the routine. Arthur, engrossed in the explosions and chases on the screen, heard neither her discontent nor the surprised cry that followed. "Oh!" burst from Olga, and to herself she added with a bitter smile. "There's your oh. There's your trusting fool. Ideal family life, you say? Here you go, sign on the dotted line." Among her mother-in-law's neatly folded things lay a piece of underwear that clearly did not belong to the ample Natalie. This tiny, foreign item of clothing might, perhaps, have fit on her hand, but certainly not on the place it was intended for. The find was a cold shower, instantly aligning all the pieces of the scattered puzzle. The picture of their seemingly prosperous family life appeared in a new, horrifying light. Arthur was cheating on her. Hiding behind fabricated reasons, he vilely betrayed their 7-year marriage, their trust, their shared joys and overcome difficulties. He spat on everything they had built together, on their mutual support and lack of envy, even on the absence of children, which they had postponed, believing they had an eternity ahead of them. Olia was just 18 when she got married, and only recently had images of the future with a baby begun to timidly appear in her thoughts. Arthur hadn't touched upon the subject, and she herself was too shy, not just to say it directly, but even to hint. Now, the question of procreation had receded to the background before a much sharper problem. Inside, a desire boiled to stage a grand scandal for her husband, one that would shake the walls, to walk into the room and slap him across the face with this thing, this irrefutable proof of his lies. The first impulse of scorching anger quickly faded as Olga realized she was still clutching the foreign underwear in her hand. It became unbearably disgusting. Crumpling the evidence of betrayal, she threw it back into the bag with force. Years of basketball practice had not been in vain. The incriminating item landed precisely where it had been extracted from. Suddenly, it became hard to breathe, as if an invisible hand had squeezed her lungs. Fortunately, the washing machine stood in the kitchen, and Olga, overcoming the pain that now gaped where her heart should be, took a few steps and sank to the floor, leaning against the cool metal of the appliance. What if Arthur wasn't to blame? Maybe her mother-in-law accidentally picked up her roommate's underwear. After all, who knows? Maybe they shared a room or a closet. Relations with Natalie had improved recently, but calling her to clarify such a delicate matter was absolutely undesirable. For some reason, she felt ashamed, as if she herself were the culprit. From the room came the booming sounds of the movie, preventing her from concentrating and calmly thinking about what to do with her husband now and what punishment he deserved if her suspicions were correct. Olga meticulously went through all the soul-scratching moments in her memory, which had been happening more and more often lately. The main thing was his regular absences. For about a month, Arthur spent almost all his free time without her, citing strange reasons. Individually, they could be called valid, justified. but there were too many of them. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, he would say, "Darling, I'll run to the dacha in the morning, get water the beds while the pressure is good. Then I'll stay at work a bit longer. The boss allowed this schedule before the weekend." He cited helping a friend or team building with colleagues. And all these oddities had been going on for about a month. And in the last 2 weeks, Arthur's sense of filial duty had suddenly sharpened. While Natalie was resting at the sanatorium, he went to her apartment every other day to water the flowers. You see, it was hot outside. The apartment turned into a sauna at noon, and his mother's favourite plants could die. Even the owner herself didn't care for these violets so tenderly. Now Olga clearly saw the strangeness of his behaviour. Usually the care of the flowers fell on her shoulders, but not this year. Arthur, hugging her affectionately, said that she was already very tired, and these chores were no trouble for him at all. And Olga had suggested moving her mother-in-law's beloved flowers to the bathroom, where it was always cooler, and turning on grow lights there so they would have enough light. But her husband objected to this quite reasonable suggestion. He seemed to argue reasonably. Water, electricity unsupervised, not the best option. But her heart was still uneasy. Olga was very worried and didn't know what to do. It would be good, of course, to talk to someone and get outside advice. But whom to turn to? The most obvious, and at the same time the most unfortunate option, was to call her mother. Upon learning of her daughter's suspicions, she would be very upset, start taking valerian drops, her blood pressure would rise. No, her mother must not be worried under any circumstances. Olga had no close friends with whom she could discuss such a delicate topic. She had many acquaintances, friendly and welcoming women, but she would not dare to share her family problems with any of them. This would cause unnecessary pity, and a leak of personal information was impossible to rule out. Her reputation as a happy, prosperous woman would go down the drain. The CEO had a peculiar quirk. Key positions could only be held by people who, in his opinion, had a good personal life. Harmony at home, he believed, had a beneficial effect on work. After a divorce or less significant troubles, such as revealed infidelities and conflicts, employees were transferred to other positions. Formalities were observed. Salary and employment record did not suffer, but Olga had no desire for such changes. So there was nowhere to expect hints on how to live on. She would have to manage with her own mind. Grey spots danced before Olga's eyes, a sure sign of an impending migraine. The woman winced. That was all she needed. If the migraine took hold, she would be out of commission for a couple of days. And tomorrow was a meeting with the commercial director. How untimely everything was. And all this because of the find, curse it. Or, to be more precise, because of Arthur and his possible infidelity. Speak of the devil. The culprit of Olga's headache appeared in the kitchen. He acted as if nothing had happened. He turned on the kettle, made a couple of sandwiches, looked at his bag, and addressed his wife. "Olya, just forget about the chores. I'm going to Mum's tomorrow. I'll put everything in her washing machine there so I don't have to haul it back and forth. And anyway, let's go watch the movie. It's really good. I didn't even expect it." Arthur began to briefly retell the plot to his wife, but Olga interrupted him. She had no strength to listen to idle chatter after finding the incriminating evidence. "No thanks. I think I'll lie down here instead. I'm kind of tired. It was a tough Monday." "Okay, then I'll turn the sound down. And you don't turn on the washing machine either. How can you rest with it running? Shall I turn off the light?" Olga nodded, feeling the pain surge. She didn't want to talk to the cheat at all. Arthur placed the prepared sandwiches on a tray, picked up the bag, and left the kitchen, closing the door behind him. In the darkness, the headache receded a little, and the woman didn't even notice how she fell asleep on the sofa. In the morning, Olga opened her eyes, mentally rejoicing that the migraine had apparently decided to spare her. The night's rest had been surprisingly beneficial. Even the certainty of her husband's infidelity was no longer as strong as it had been the day before. Instead, the version that the foreign underwear had gotten mixed up among her mother-in-law's things now seemed the most plausible. Olga stretched on the sofa, once again glad she had insisted on buying it, and began to get ready for work, preparing breakfast at the same time. Arthur usually woke up later, and this morning was no exception. By the time her husband appeared in the kitchen, Olga had finished breakfast, left him food, and was already on the verge of leaving. "Olya, don't expect me home early tonight. Right after work, I'll drop by Mum's apartment, do the laundry, and check on the flowers. Otherwise, she won't forgive me if anything bad happens to her green pets." Jealousy and resentment stung her heart again. The woman almost flinched when Arthur, as always, came over to kiss her, but she managed to endure the usual morning ritual. Olga hurried to work because she needed to get her usual routine tasks done before the meeting. However, it was difficult to concentrate. Her thoughts involuntarily returned to yesterday's find in her husband's bag. At the meeting, the commercial director even made a remark. "Olga, are you not at all interested in the topic of our meeting?" "Why, Alexander? I'm listening very attentively." "Strange. You have such a distant look, as if you're somewhere far away." Knowing perfectly well what and how the commercial director spoke, Olga recounted several main points. Quite satisfied with the result, Alexander interrupted her and continued his speech. While the man eloquently poured verbal water from an empty vessel into a full one, Olga decided to follow her husband. Fortunately, she worked later, and setting up an ambush near her mother-in-law's house was not difficult. Her mother-in-law's yard was a dead end, and there was only one road leading to it, at the turn of which was a cafe with panoramic windows. If you sat in a good corner, the view would be excellent, and there was no need to worry about Arthur stopping by for pastries. He wouldn't be dragged into that kind of cafe even by a lasso. After making the decision, the woman calmed down a little and barely distracted herself with thoughts of her husband's infidelity for the rest of the workday. Only as evening approached did she start to tremble a bit. After all, it was an unusual undertaking. You don't do this every day. Or, to be more precise, this would be her debut in the field of secret surveillance. At the cafe, Olga ordered fruit drink and a pastry, which the saleswoman actively advertised to her. Only now did the woman, suspecting her husband of infidelity, realize that, preoccupied with her worries, she had forgotten to have lunch. The strawberry filling in the pastry turned out to be unusually tasty, and the wait was not so agonizing. Noticing her husband's car drive past the cafe, Olga continued to carry out her task. Following him was not difficult. He parked the car on the paved lot, took a sports bag from the back seat, and without looking around, entered her mother-in-law's building. A few minutes later, the light came on in the kitchen windows of her apartment. Olga froze in anticipation. If Arthur had a date, then the mistress should appear soon. On a warm summer evening, there were many people outside, as walking through the quiet courtyard was a shortcut. Her heart skipped a beat every time attractive women passed by the entrance. However, they all passed by. Only a few guys with beer entered the building. Under the cover of passers-by and overgrown bushes, Olga watched. Then the light went out, and the woman saw her husband come out of the building alone with a clearly empty bag. It seemed he was waiting for the washing machine to finish. Apparently, no one had come to see him. And Olga couldn't believe that the mistress destroyer lived in the same building of a modest Khrushchev-era apartment block. It was too unlikely a scenario, perhaps only for some third-rate melodramatic series. She found it lukewarm, below average enjoyment. Despite the fact that her surveillance debut did not bring the expected results, Olga decided to observe her husband closely for a few more days. It wasn't such a difficult task. At least I'll bring clarity to this whole situation, the woman thought. It's okay that I don't have experience, and Arthur might notice me. I'll explain somehow. The morning surveillance on Wednesday was foiled. Although, of course, the fact that her husband woke up at the crack of dawn to go to the dacha did raise suspicions. However, Olga simply couldn't afford to take time off work. In the evening, Arthur went straight home after work. This reassured her a little. Thursday also brought Olga no incriminating evidence against her husband. Moreover, he had only visited his mother's apartment once during these days, as if he felt he was being watched by his wife. However, Olga understood that it was too early to relax. Who knows what her husband's schedule of meetings with his mistress might be, if she existed? Mentally scolding herself for her indecision, the suspicious woman didn't even check her husband's phone. But there were so many numbers in the call history, including repeated ones, that none of them immediately stood out. Reading messages and messengers also yielded nothing. Olga knew there were online chats where correspondence disappeared immediately after leaving the session. However, the browser history on his smartphone did not record visits to such sites. Realizing that she was just an ordinary person, not a trained specialist, Olga decided to go all in and try to disrupt her husband's supposed meeting with his mistress. On Friday evening, she suggested, "Artie, we've been staying home too much. Maybe we could take an impromptu excursion, like a weekend trip." Arthur smiled guiltily and spread his hands. "No, Olya, I'm sorry. I'm going to Mum's on Saturday, you understand. I'll come back tired. I won't be up for walks. Sunday is also impossible. My colleagues and I agreed to go to the football game. Look at the stadium they built here, like a spaceship from some sci-fi movie. We need to see what our taxes are being spent on, among other things." Olga felt her husband was lying to her. His fumbling and shifting confirmed her suspicions. So, her assumptions were correct. Her husband's meeting with his mistress was scheduled for the weekend. The woman decided to go all in. "Listen, that's just wonderful. I'll go to Natalie's with you. It's kind of awkward. She's coming back from the sanatorium in a week, if I'm not mistaken, and I haven't visited her once. After the sanatorium, we'll drive around the area and we'll have a spontaneous vacation." Arthur tried to dissuade his wife. "Olya, you weren't feeling very well at the beginning of the week. I think you need to rest." "Olya, don't be silly," Olga insisted. "Artie, it's just impolite not to visit your mother-in-law even once. Besides, I just need a change of scenery." Olga hoped she would be able to see her mother-in-law's neighbor. She was very persistent and got her way. Her husband agreed to take her on the trip to his mother's. Natalie was sincerely happy to see both her son and daughter-in-law. They had a wonderful time walking along the well-kept paths laid out between the majestic trees. Even the summer heat in the dappled shade seemed less exhausting. Quick red squirrels, tamed by visitors and staff, amusingly scampered along the branches and came down to people for treats. Natalie suggested, "Here, take some seeds and nuts. Try feeding these little animals yourselves. They're so funny. They use their paws just like hands." The squirrels fearlessly came down to the outstretched palms with treats, delicately took the goodies, and ate neatly, looking up with intelligent eyes. By one of the paths, Natalie introduced a woman she met to her daughter-in-law. "This is Annie, my roommate. A lady of almost immense proportions smiled warmly. Olga almost burst into tears of disappointment. The hope that the item of women's clothing found in her husband's bag belonged to her mother-in-law's roommate was shattered. This item clearly could not have belonged to this woman. Trying not to show her disappointment and anger, Olga continued the walk. But there was no trace of her former serenity left. Saying goodbye to Natalie, the couple left the sanatorium grounds, and Arthur, completely unaware of his wife's changed mood, suggested, "Well, shall we drive around the area, as we planned?" "Oh, Artie, I think I've had enough walking. Let's just go home. I'm kind of worn out too. And I have football tomorrow. I'm not that old yet. But I already have to conserve energy." Annoyed, Olga couldn't help but retort, "Yes, you're an old man. And it looks like I have a flabby body too." Arthur ignored his wife's displeased tone. He wasn't even bothered that Olga didn't talk to him on the way home, attributing it all to her fatigue. Olga decided that the surveillance of her husband was a crucial stage. Indeed, if he had a mistress, and he was supposedly going to a football game, which he had never been a fan of, it meant he was clearly going on a date. In the morning, Arthur got up very early, even earlier than his wife, and woke her up with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. When she entered the kitchen, the man had almost finished breakfast. "All right, darling, I'm off," Olga remarked sarcastically. "Isn't it a bit early? As I recall, the football match starts in the evening." The man tried to speak convincingly and calmly. "Well, we'll gather first, chat, and then head to the stadium." The woman didn't make any more sarcastic remarks, so as not to make her husband suspicious, and asked, "Are you walking or driving?" "Driving. I'm not planning to drink, and I don't want to deal with taxis or public transport. This way I feel more at ease. I'm my own boss." "Okay, I understand. Then I'll get to the beauty salon myself. It's fine. Have a good time." Olga tried to speak as calmly as possible. It seemed to her that her husband didn't even suspect that she didn't trust him and was planning to follow him. The parking lot was a 5-minute walk from the house, and as soon as the door closed behind Arthur, Olga called a taxi and quickly got dressed. The taxi driver was not surprised by the passenger's request to follow another car. Apparently, it wasn't the first time he had been involved in such stories. "But if you'll allow me, I'll give you a piece of advice. Some secrets are better left unknown," he added thoughtfully. The man drove confidently, staying a little behind the car they were following. "I had a case with my first wife. She kept running off somewhere, saying she was going to the store, or to a friend's, or somewhere else. Suspicion immediately crept into my mind. Of course I followed her. It's not pleasant being a cuckold." The driver, repeating Arthur's maneuver, turned into the parking lot near the supermarket and, choosing the best spot for observation, turned off the engine and continued his story. "So, my wife tells me she's going to the store again, and I think she's running off to the children's boarding school for the mentally disabled. Her child lived there. She put him there because it was difficult for her, and only someone who has faced such misfortune themselves can judge her for that act. Well, back then I was like, in a white coat, playing the holy martyr. I almost went mad. How could this be? They kept such a secret from me. Both Lucy and her mother were silent. So I caught her at the gates of that almshouse and made a scene. She didn't even try to justify herself, just said she knew they would divorce anyway. And whether it was because of the truth or a lie, what difference does it make?" The driver, without asking his passenger's permission, lit a cigarette and continued his confession, ignoring the growing ash column. "I don't know what I would have done if she had told me the truth right away back when we were dating. Maybe I wouldn't have married her, or maybe the opposite. I would have asked her to introduce me to the child. Now I think I could have understood everything if only Lucy had been honest with me. But no, it was easier for her to deceive me. What would you have done in my place? Could you have forgiven? Olga didn't know how to answer the taxi driver correctly, but her husband, appearing in the doorway of the store with two huge bags in his hands, relieved her of the need to voice her opinion. Especially since it wouldn't have been absolution for the man anyway. Arthur, not expecting to be followed, didn't look around, quickly walked to the car, put his load in the trunk, and drove on. The taxi driver, keeping a short distance, followed. He didn't say anything else, reliving the events of the past once again. The car turned off the highway onto a road perfectly familiar to Olga. Now another 12 kilometers from the turn, and the energetic gardening cooperative would appear. Her mother-in-law was allocated her legal 600 square meters there back in Soviet times. Olga had gone there even before she was engaged, when she had just started dating Arthur. Natalie hadn't burdened her much with work back then, and even now she prefers to tend the greenhouse and other plantings. She stopped growing potatoes on her plot long ago, filling the freed-up space with berry bushes. She has honeysuckle, strawberries, currants, raspberries, and gooseberries there. How could a devotee of Chekhov's talent be without them? The newly appeared cheat, turning on his blinkers, turned towards the dacha area. Continuing the surveillance by taxi was too noticeable. Olga asked the taxi driver to stop and, having paid, hurried towards her mother-in-law's plot. Good luck, the driver wished. Remember, everything always happens for the best. Olga hurried to her mother-in-law's plot and saw Arthur driving the car behind the gate. She rushed to the overgrown lilac bush by the abandoned dacha diagonally across. From there, she could see what was happening. Fortunately, her mother-in-law hadn't yet replaced the low picket fence on the street side with metal profile sheets, and everything was almost in plain sight. Olga almost screamed with anger when a woman in a crop top and shorts fluttered out onto the porch of the dacha house. The stranger's physique indicated that she could well be the owner of the ill-fated find discovered in Arthur's bag. Smiling, the mistress took one of the bags from Arthur. It was obvious they knew each other, but the phrases they exchanged were indistinguishable. The deceived woman left her hiding place and headed towards the dacha to stage a loud scene for the traitor husband and his paramour for the neighbors' amusement. But she froze in place. Her father appeared on the porch, the very one who 3 years ago vilely announced to her mother that he had met and fallen in love with another woman. He said that their daughter was already grown up, and nothing else held them together, so he was leaving the house, taking the family savings as compensation for half of the apartment bought during the marriage. Olga had tried to influence her father then, urged him not to act rashly, begged him to think about the severe blow he was inflicting on the wife he had lived with for so many years. She threatened to cut off all contact with him if he destroyed the family. Useless. Peter abandoned his wife and tried to continue communicating with his daughter, congratulating her on holidays. But Olga blocked his number. Then other numbers from which he called met the same fate. Soon, her father stopped trying to contact her. Meeting her father's former colleague, she learned that Peter had quit his job and moved somewhere out of town. Veronica would probably have gone mad if not for her daughter's support, who practically moved in with her for several months and made sure she didn't do anything to herself. It's not easy to forget years of happy marriage wiped out by infidelity. Her mother sobbed on her daughter's shoulder. Can you imagine he said he met the love of his life? And who was I to him then? Just a passerby? An incubator for his only daughter? Upon learning this unexpected news and seeing her mother in such a state for the first time, Olga was shocked. She had always considered her parents' marriage unshakable, indestructible, like a rock. However, it turned out that all the years of married life could be very easily erased with a single word. Olga felt a weight lift from her heart because of the tenderness with which her father hugged the woman she didn't know, how he kissed her on the shoulder, and how readily and obligingly he took the bag from her. It was obvious that this was the very destroyer, or, in his own words, the love of his life. Arthur looked at this outrage completely calmly, and soon the trio headed into the house. They didn't close the door, and Olga followed them inside, greeting them with a voice ringing with indignation. "Hello, private company." The woman saw astonished faces. Arthur was the first to react. "Olya, how did you get here?" "Well, I was sitting at home, bored. I thought, let me go to the football game with my husband too. But this is some kind of tango for three, not a football match from behind the bushes." "Olya, daughter, hello," Peter exclaimed, startled. "I'm very glad to see you. Please meet her. This is Sophia, Sophie, and this is my daughter, Olya, my pride. This is the one I've told you so much about." Olga managed to see that the woman in the top and shorts was roughly her age, and she didn't mince words. "So, this is her? The love of your life? Golden hand? Foot? Or what part of her body did she charm you with? I can't say it's nice to meet you, because I'm disgusted to see her and you, Arthur. And you've really disappointed me. I would never have thought you'd be entertaining your runaway father-in-law and his girl at your mother's dacha." "Don't you dare talk about Sophie like that," Olga's father protested. "Oh, you'd think she's a delicate violet. By the way, Sophie, didn't you lose your pants out of squeamishness? My auntie must have accidentally picked them up with all sorts of dirty towels. Is it inconvenient to wash here? Or is Sophie afraid of overworking her golden hands?" Peter demanded. "Olya, stop. Enough with the slander. Your husband is helping us at my request, and there's nothing wrong with that. He's a wonderful and responsive person. He's acting mercifully, not showing callousness and malice towards an innocent person." "Well, I'd be ashamed to call your Sophie innocent. Stealing a husband from a strong and prosperous family, forcing him to quit a good job with a stable income, compelling him to live not in a normal, well-appointed apartment, but in a dacha house with a bio-toilet and a shower from a tank. Forgive me, but not in her prime." "Yes, wonderful. Nothing to say. So, Sophie is just a champion at improving conditions? Maybe she should even get a medal for her contribution to a happy approach to the grave." Peter's mistress was uncomfortable, but she remained silent. Olga's father also didn't interfere in the angry dialogue of his daughter, who had shifted the vector of her anger towards her husband. It became clear to her that her mother-in-law's dacha had become a refuge for the lovers. Arthur lowered his eyes, and Olga needed no further verbal response. It became obvious to her that her husband had not cheated on her with another woman, but he had not acted much better. With Natalie's permission, either out of a sense of male solidarity or for some other reason, he was enabling his father-in-law and his paramour. "You sneaky things," Olga gasped. "How long have you been hiding this dacha haven for lovers from me? A month? More?" "Daughter, calm down and let's talk," Peter suggested. "It's not so simple." "Yes, I bought all sorts of goodies," Arthur announced. "Indeed, let's discuss everything at the table." Olga didn't fail to speak out once more about the hated destroyer of her parents' family. "I will not sit at the same table with this Sophie, the golden foot." The young destroyer, shrugging, said, "Pete, I'll go take care of the plantings and pick some berries. Call me if you need help." Arthur gently touched his wife's hand and pleaded, "Don't be angry, Olya. I couldn't do otherwise. After all, Peter is not a stranger, and generally he did a lot of good things for us." Olga pulled her hand away and without hesitation began to scold. "Yes, he did a lot of good things. I barely saved Mom after his betrayal. I was afraid she would do something bad, leave me an orphan. And all because of this Sophie. Turns out he found himself a Galician princess." Peter, taking products out of the bags his son-in-law had brought and setting the table, remained silent. The man knew perfectly well that his daughter had a quick temper, but was quick to forgive. He just needed to let her vent. Sighing, Olga sank into her favorite armchair in her mother-in-law's dacha house and turned to her father. "Well, tell me, newlywed, how did you end up living in the countryside? It used to be almost impossible to lure you to visit the dacha. And now, I understand, you've been here for a month. And for some reason you're also bringing groceries and all that." Peter smiled slightly. "You're so smart. You figured it all out right away. Sophie and I actually have to hide. We got into a very ugly, scary situation. Now we have to hide from creditors." Olga was extremely surprised. "How? You were always a fierce opponent of loans?" Her father shrugged. "Well, even an old woman can make a mistake. That's how it happened. When I left your mother, Sophie and I moved to her town. We bounced around rented apartments. I worked odd jobs, saved money to buy a house within the city limits, and start my own business. We even leased a suitable option that was very popular with the target audience. People came to us. But while we were in a practically suspended state, of course, neither modest advertising nor a loud PR campaign was possible. Sophie and I decided to make everything official, buy this house with the plot, and seriously develop everything on a normal scale, not just haphazardly. I had little money left. It somehow disappeared unnoticed. Sophie suggested borrowing from her acquaintances. Then everything happened like in a bad crime movie. We were robbed on the way to the deal. They cut off the car that Sophie was driving on a power of attorney from her friend. The fender was slightly dented, but at least they didn't injure us. Ah, Olya, if you had seen how Sophie defended me, you would never, ever say bad things about her. She threw herself at the bandits like a tigress. She threatened and even shouted that if they touched me with even a finger, they wouldn't get anything at all. It was so brave, so sincere, but so reckless. I was truly scared for Sophie then, and I think I loved her even more. I understand that it might be unpleasant for you to hear this because of your mother, but I don't want to lie to you. In short, they psychologically pressured us and named a debt amount that was beyond all reason. So we had to, as they say, flee the city. There weren't many options for where we could hide. We just need to get by until Sophie's friend, who has connections in high circles, returns from her trip to India. She went there for enlightenment. One of the main conditions the guru set for her is a complete break from her usual reality, an absolute rejection of all forms of connection with the past. So I had to turn to Artie as my closest person. I was very uncomfortable. If not for him, who knows if I would be alive now. I am very glad that my son-in-law agreed to solve our problem with housing and providing us with everything necessary. Thank you very much to Natalie as well, even a huge thank you. She understood our situation, allowed us to stay here. No one will think of looking for us here, so we can relax and not worry. I understand that Sophie and I are practically a heavy burden on your family budget, but I promise, as soon as our situation improves, I will return everything, and thank you. Peter spread his hands, showing that he didn't expect any compensation. Olga clarified. Make a fool of yourself, Dad? And couldn't you have gone to the police? If these bandits damaged the car, especially someone else's, and tried to intimidate you, they should be held accountable. There must be some way to deal with them. I think you absolutely must file a report. Of course, a hot pursuit investigation won't work now, but you have to fight this lawlessness somehow. Oh, Olia, how naive you still are. Sophie said that their local police department is completely corrupt. If you go to them, you could lose your health, or even your life, without trial or investigation. But aren't there supervisory bodies above the police? The prosecutor's office, or something like an internal affairs department? It's better not to go to them either. It's like going into water without knowing the depth. Anyway, for a good result, you need to have a direct connection with someone from the staff. Then the case won't get stuck. When Sophie's friend comes back, then we can try. But for now, we have to lie low. So, that's the situation, Olia. In my old age, I've found myself in such a mess that I wouldn't wish it on an enemy. Thank you. Your husband and his mother have been merciful to Sophie and me. Otherwise, I'd probably be rotting somewhere buried like a dog now. Peter looked like a tired man, not a happy lover at all. The resentment for her mother somehow faded into the background. She didn't want to be sarcastic or comment on the boomerang that had returned. After all, this man with anxiety in his eyes continued to be her father, the same one who taught her to ride a bicycle, supported her in difficult situations, and explained math and physics problems. The same one who allowed her to marry Arthur when she turned 18. Her mother had insisted then that she shouldn't rush, but her father reminded her that they had also gotten married almost a week after their high school graduation party. Arthur, sensing that Olga's mood had warmed, decided not to push his luck further and asked his father-in-law in a gentle voice, "Peter, maybe we should have some tea. Let's at least have some tea with sandwiches." The man was embarrassed, realizing he was offering his daughter and son-in-law food, essentially at their own expense, and added, "Remember, Olia, what your grandmother used to say, using your own lard to grease your own chops?" The woman smiled sincerely for the first time on this difficult day. "Yes, and I always used to ask her what chops meant. Grandma would explain it to me every time as if it were the first. It was like a ceremony for us." "Dad, I'm sorry, but I really don't feel like eating. Too much news for today, and tomorrow is a work day. I need to get a good rest before it. And before that, I still need to have a serious talk with Arthur about secrets in married life." Although, judging by Olga's tone, the main emotional storm had passed. Arthur approached his wife and lowered his head guiltily. Peter began to thank his son-in-law again, not forgetting to put in a good word for him. "Thank you for everything. Go, get some rest. Just, daughter, don't be angry with your husband and don't scold him. He's golden. If anyone is to blame, it's me." Olga left her favorite armchair and froze, not knowing how to act next. Hug and kiss the father who had betrayed her mother years ago, or just say goodbye. Each option seemed inappropriate to her. Sophia, appearing on the porch with a basket, diffused the situation. "Here, I've picked some berries for you and Natalie. As far as I know, she should be back from the sanatorium soon. We'll manage to figure out where to move by then so we don't bother anyone." The words of her father's young mistress stirred up anger in Olga's soul again. "How cleverly you dispose of others' things and don't inconvenience yourself." Of course, Arthur put his arm around his wife's waist and gently but persistently pulled her towards the exit to prevent her from flaring up again. Olga felt terribly tired, both from following him and from the news that had fallen upon her. Peter went to see his daughter and son-in-law to their car. With a gesture, he asked Sophie to stay in the house so as not to provoke another outburst of hatred. On the way home, Olga tried not to show her irritation at the situation that had arisen in her life. Her husband turned out not to be a cheat, and she mentally praised herself for not sharing her suspicions of his infidelity with her mother. However, how to react to her father's partial return was completely unclear. Fearing that his detached concern for her mother and the berries picked by Sophie were insincere. Generously throwing around other people's good, the thought flashed. At home, Arthur tried to anticipate his wife's every wish to improve her mood. After dinner, he finally decided to apologize. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Peter right away. I was afraid you'd be angry." "You were right to be afraid. Dad's action was the end of my childhood. You know, I honestly thought for a long time that I wouldn't even talk to him, even if he begged for a meeting. But then I ran into him, and I felt sorry for him. Oh, I'm afraid this Sophie is clearly not living in the house with partial amenities with pure intentions towards my father." Arthur tried to justify his father-in-law's new paramour. "Olia, you yourself understand that you're not judging her quite fairly. Sophie seemed to treat Peter with great tenderness. She cooks and keeps the dacha tidy. And generally, my dear, I think you're being too critical of her. She had a very difficult past, but she didn't become embittered. Can you imagine, at 18, she had an elderly grandmother, a younger sister, and one brother on her hands. Despite all this, Sophie managed to get an education herself, a vocational one, but in a sought-after profession. I'm absolutely not interested in the biography of this swindler. Arthur, have you fallen under her influence too? How predictable you men are. A cunning woman pulls the wool over your eyes, and you're ready to defend her and destroy families because of her. Olia, you just didn't see the tenderness with which she cared for Peter. It's impossible to fake. And how she defended him during the attack. But you didn't see that, Olga reasonably countered. Fear has big eyes, and it's quite possible that the incident was completely different in reality. The woman was angry and didn't want to elaborate on the topic of her father and his girlfriend, so she concluded the matter. Okay, maybe it's not my business. I'll just tell you one thing. It would probably be sensible for my dad and this girlfriend of his to rent a dacha in the same area. I think there were a few options. Arthur supported his wife's idea. Of course you're right. My mother is used to being alone everywhere, both in the city apartment and at the dacha. She won't like it if someone else is managing her territory at the same time as her. I'll post an ad in the dacha chat now that we'll rent a dacha, at least for the rest of the season. I'll be driving Mom anyway, and this way I can also drop by Peter's. Well, and then, as your father said, this neighbour's influential friend will return, and maybe the whole situation will be resolved peacefully. Actually, you and I have bank accounts, and we could withdraw money and help Peter out. Are you out of your mind? Dad betrayed me and Mom. You haven't experienced 1/100th of the emotional suffering we have. And now I'm supposed to give him my savings and yours? And lose interest too? A fig and butter for them, not money. Okay, darling. Calm down. I understand. We won't touch the accounts. When talking to and meeting with her mother, Olga was afraid of letting slip that she knew where her father was. And Natalie also kept Peter's secret. They couldn't rent a well-appointed dacha, but Arthur was offered an overgrown plot almost at the edge of the area for practically free, for the cost of water and electricity. The location would have been the worst for people who went to the dacha for a harvest. But for forced fugitives, it was hard to imagine a better option. Peter and Sophia, gathering their few belongings, moved to the new place. Arthur continued to provide them with everything necessary, and soon this began to irritate Olga greatly. Firstly, the funds were taken from the family budget, albeit with her husband's consent. And secondly, and most importantly, the woman found it disgusting to protect her father and his mistress. Olga felt that by doing so, she was betraying her own mother. Keeping the secret became increasingly difficult, especially since her mother-in-law was planning to celebrate her anniversary at the dacha in early August. Because of this, Olga worried that her parents might accidentally run into each other. This had to be prevented at all costs. A week before the holiday, the woman asked Arthur to take her to the dacha so she could have a serious talk with her father. She wanted to firmly explain that the following weekend, he and this Sophie, the Golden Foot, should stay in the house practically without leaving. Leaving her husband and mother-in-law, Olga headed towards the far lines of the dacha area. She knew that many owners of these 600 square meters had long abandoned tending them, and it was almost impossible to drive down the street due to the sea buckthorn and lilac bushes that had felt their freedom. But the lush vegetation provided shade, which was such a relief in the abnormally hot August. Olga walked slowly, rehearsing what and how she would say. Almost at the very gate of the desired plot, the woman heard a hateful voice. Olga was about to enter and tactlessly interrupt the conversation, but then some eighth sense made her stop. The words of her father's mistress were very unexpected. "No, Mark, I told you it's not working out yet. That nasty Olga is ruining my whole plan. If it weren't for her, I would have squeezed everything out of these fools by now. As it is, I have to live in someone else's dacha, go to the toilet outside, and wash when the water in the tank heats up. Worst of all, I have to look devotedly into the eyes of this elderly idiot. It's a good thing that because of this heat, his attraction to me disappears, and I don't have to sleep with him. Although this isn't even a bed, it's sheer mockery. Ah, dear Mark, you probably won't even recognize me after these few months. I haven't been to a spa or gone to fitness, or even visited a cosmetologist. A complete scarecrow. But for this fool Pete, it'll do. As soon as I convince him to sell his share of the apartment here, we'll get that property. Real estate prices here are almost like in the capital. This money, along with what we got from staging the robbery, will be enough for us to leave here and live normally somewhere on the coast." Sophie's intonation changed from irritated to whining, and it was clear how artistically cynical the woman was manipulating her interlocutor. However, this delight would have been much stronger if Sophie were an actress on stage. Now it was completely unclear when her father's paramour was lying and when she was telling the truth. Olga was almost not surprised by what she heard. She had suspected something similar. Fortunately, she had the presence of mind to start recording on her phone. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was possible to make everything out if you wanted to. By the end of the conversation, her father's mistress's speech was a continuous string of exclamations. She talked about how much she missed Mark, and Olga became incredibly curious how Sophie would react now if she knew that there was incriminating evidence against her. Restraining herself, Olga waited until her father's mistress finished the conversation, and only then came out of hiding. It was obvious to Olga that Sophie was extorting money, but it was difficult to prove. Now she had a recording. It meant she had to provoke the greedy Sophie and show her father the true nature of the woman because of whom he had destroyed a happy family. Deciding that she wouldn't hear anything new, Olga moved away from the bush and headed towards the house where her ill-wisher lived. Hearing footsteps, Sophie came out onto the porch. "Oh, hello, Olya. Come in, please. I've made some soup here. It's tasty, I think. Let me offer you some for now, and then Dad will come." He went to the spring, thinking no one he knew would meet him there. Olga didn't say everything she wanted to, and clarified, "And has Dad been living with you long?" Sophie replied with a feigned sigh. "Yes, it's not very interesting." Meeting her father on the forest path, Olga asked, "Listen to me and try to believe. Sophie is just using you to get money. The attack on you both was staged, and here, at the Dachas, she's hiding with you from an imaginary danger. Here, listen to the recording I made." Peter listened to Sophie's cynical speech, and his face changed. She felt sorry for him, but Olga didn't stop the recording. It was better to swallow the bitter pill right away. "Yes, daughter, modern technology has come a long way," he said when the recording ended. "Admit it, you somehow managed to compose Sophie's voice to make me quarrel with her." Olga was discouraged. She realized that her father's feeling for the brazen, unprincipled liar was deep. All attempts to tell or even provide visual evidence that the mistress intended to become the owner of elite real estate at the expense of others would be met with displeasure and even scandals. She had to somehow convince her father, open his eyes. "Dad, I beg you, don't rush to get money for her. She'll come up with something else to fleece you. So, I'll set up a test for her. I'll say that we've been brought money to pay off the debts, and you and Arthur will watch her to understand how she'll act. It would be good to have a few strong guys to help us. I think that's solvable." "Dad," Olga replied, "let's go to our place for now to discuss all the details." Without looking into his overgrown house, Peter headed towards his son-in-law's, accompanied by his daughter. In the evening, the mistress again noticed that Peter was cold towards her, but didn't pay much attention to it, especially since this detachment suited her completely. Only when the man announced that his son-in-law had agreed to provide the money, but only in cash, did Sophie almost jump for joy. "My love, my sunshine. Now we can return to our usual way of life. Isn't it a miracle?" Arthur smiled. So far, everything was going exactly as they had planned. Thanks to one of his friends, he managed to invite former Special Forces soldiers to participate in the detention of the fraudsters. When Sophie's accomplices arrived at the dacha, squeezing with difficulty down the overgrown street, they were immediately apprehended by the brave guys. They treated Sophia very delicately, and Peter, coming very close, announced, "You, Sophie, despite your wise name, wanted to divorce me again. But you didn't take into account that you talked too much and where you shouldn't. Fortunately, Olga overheard your nasty conversation. So if you don't want to end up in prison for fraud and drag fools with you, then pay me back what you stole from me with the help of your friends." Sophie had no choice but to write a receipt. Tired but relieved, Peter asked Arthur to drive him to the city and hurried to his wife, buying a gorgeous bouquet of flowers on the way. "Veronica, it's like water under the bridge with me. Let's try to start our relationship anew." Veronica smiled at her ex-husband, and he thought he had found the key to her heart. But the woman suddenly announced, "Actually, I've already started a new love story, and you don't fit into it. So, if you want to take anything from the apartment, do it honestly. After all, during the divorce, you took almost everything you brought, and I didn't fight for a single thing. If they were important to you, you took them. And now you suddenly realized you undersold yourself. You're left with nothing. Although with the amount N returned by Sophie."